Super, we're live. Excellent. Right, there's always a little bit of delay, isn't there, when you go live from another platform into Facebook. So we're here this morning with Eve Bradley, who's a trauma recovery mentor, abuse recovery mentor, to talk about narcissistic abuse and domestic abuse and all those kind of touchy little subjects that actually we often don't like to talk about. But this is something that we have both personally experienced. And I think we're both of a mind that these conversations need to be had more in public, particularly for women working in business, because there'll be many with businesses, and I've seen this in business networking groups, struggling to get their businesses off the ground, working really hard, but at the same time, they're in a narcissistic or abusive relationship. Mm-hmm. And it's really important for women, which is what we're talking about today, to be able to recognize narcissism and abuse. Because I have to say, it took me quite some time to realize what was going on. It was, it's subtle. You creep into it. It's, and those are the things we're going to be talking about today. So if you're joining us live, let us know if you're here live. If you're joining on replay, let us know. We're going live in StreamYard today, so you will need to give StreamYard permission. There's a link below to see your name. Otherwise, we will just see a Facebook user, and it's nice to be able to put a face to a name. So, I won't say it's a pleasant subject, but I think it's a conversation that needs to be had more. And I think we're seeing that, aren't we, in social movements now about women's rights, women's spaces, all sorts of things that we need to.
There's been quite a few events, hasn't there, recently that have brought this conversation to the forefront for women.
I think there is. I was a little bit disappointed that Boris Johnson did not make misogyny a hate crime the other day. That really, I have to say.
I was more disappointed to find out that Dominic Raab thought that women could misogynistic towards men.
Yeah, I have to say, that was a bit of a mind-blowing moment. Yeah, I was like, do you not know what misogyny means? But we're here really to talk about, is it love or is it a trauma bond? So do you want to open up that conversation for us?
Yeah, we'll talk about what a trauma bond is first, because I think for a lot of people, the first time they hear about it can be quite an eye-opening and mind-opening experience, because a lot of what society and what we're socialized to believe is love actually falls much more under the category of something called a trauma bond. And a trauma bond is this phenomenon, somewhat like Stockholm syndrome, whereby the capture of a kidnapper falls in love or develops feelings for, or begins to become a comrade for their kidnapper. And it's very strange, because from the outside, one would question why they would be defending, supporting, even, having a romantic relationship with somebody who is inflicting trauma on them. However, it's quite a normal psychological response to a very abnormal situation. And a trauma bond is this same kind of thing that happens inside a relationship. And it's kind of got three strands, the trauma bond. There is the energetic development, whereby we make some sort of spiritual connection with somebody, that kind of soulmate, twin flame, karmic partner kind of language that is often bandied around about relationships, which aren't necessarily healthy energy that's being transferred between the two people. And often there could be quite a drain coming from one side of the relationship on the other person. Then you've got this emotional bond that's being formed, and this is all these memories that are being created in a relationship, and often that we hold on to, these positive, good memories. And then there could be interwoven with some really quite horrific and traumatic memories, some behaviours that don't fit the belief that you've developed about this partner that is in your life. So this is this thing called cognitive dissonance that we experience, whereby we feel this sense of tension because the person that we see in front of us and the behaviour they're displaying doesn't match the beliefs about how we came to fall in love with them at the beginning. They're not that person that we saw at the beginning, and we don't seem to be able to get that person. And so we have to start to adapt our beliefs about them. And there are two ways. We can either adapt our beliefs about them, or we can adapt our beliefs about ourselves. And often people inside abusive relationships find that they do that. They self-gaslight, they self-blame, they adjust. Because our behaviour's in our control, we start to change our behaviour. So we don't contact friends to meet up with them. We don't pursue our dreams. We do arrest our own personal growth because we know that it's going to have a negative impact at home in the relationship.
Yeah, I can 100% identify with all that. That's sorry to interrupt you. That's exactly what I did. And I, found myself questioning me in that. Oh, there must be something wrong with me. Perhaps I'm not capable of an adult human relationship. What's wrong with me that all this feels at odds when obviously other women are just dealing with it and it's not a problem for them? And I found myself for a long while thinking in that way.
Absolutely. And we can look at the wider society, the macro around that, and about the conversations about relationships being hard, about women having to kind of forsake themselves for their that sort of thing is definitely part of the wider conversation. But actually on the micro level, on the individual level, I absolutely the same. I took responsibility for the problems in my relationship for a very, very long time. And it was only once that shift happened where the pattern of behavior became so cyclical, so apparent, that I started to question, is it me? Because I'm making all these I'm adapting myself, I'm adapting my behaviour, I'm adapting what I do, what I say, what I think, even
how you look, how you dress,
everything. Exactly. And it's still not working. This isn't changing. And that's when I took an alternative perspective and started to question whether it was in fact myself. And that cycle, that's the third kind of element of the trauma bond that's being created. And this is actually physical. This is chemical, neurochemistry, hormonal cycles that we're experiencing, whereby we become addicted to the different chemicals and neurotransmitters that our body produces at the different phases during a relationship. And so that love bombing, that everything is roses and it's beautiful, and there's compliments, and there's you believe that you love the same films, you read the same books, you've got all of this aligned interests. We're experiencing huge amounts of oxytocin in this period, and that makes us feel really good. But when that tension starts to creep in, when that behavior doesn't match that belief that we have formed about the person, that's when the adrenaline comes in, because adrenaline is trying to alert us to our kind of, that we need to be on guard, that we've got a potential threat coming, and we experience adrenaline then. And then when somebody then does expose themselves, maybe they do have an outburst, maybe they're verbally abusive, maybe they're physically abusive, sexually abusive, maybe they try to control a certain element of your life initially, we experience a lot of stress then, and so our cortisol levels are very, very much increased, and this can happen over a very prolonged period. And the physical effects of having high cortisol are really quite awful, really. We've got hair loss, lack of sleep, irregular periods, and digestive problems, intolerances form, really, really chronic illnesses can be manifest from these high cortisol levels. And then once that kind of outburst fades, then you both need to come up with some sort of reason, some reconciliation, some excuse for the behavior. And this is when we see these behaviors like this gaslighting, and where we take responsibility, where the promises to change, where things will be different. If you do this and I do that, then that's gonna fix this. And then we just go into a bit of a love bombing phase again, and we just keep going round and round the cycle. And that is what our body becomes addicted to. If you experience adrenaline, it's looking for cortisol. Then it wants the dopamine, which is what we're experiencing during that reconciliation phase, back to oxytocin. And around we go. And when people come out of these relationships, they are physically addicted to that cycle. And that is incredibly hard to even get your head around, let alone break.
Yeah, because it's not an addiction that you're aware of, and it's not a pleasurable addiction, much like most addictions aren't pleasurable, are they? It's like, alcohol is not a pleasurable addiction. But
But it's not even one that you can like pinpoint to feed. So rather than thinking, especially like let's say alcohol, you know that going and getting a drink is going to satisfy and bring you that kind of, you're conscious of it.
Yeah,
exactly. Whereas with this one, the mind's ever so sneaky in as much as it won't say, right, even if you've left the relationship, even if you've been broken up for a long time, it won't say, right, pick up the phone and go and ring them. It'll just remind you of that holiday, that everything was all lovely, or it'll remind you of, and then that's where that kind of progression of thoughts then tries to lead you back into this behavior that is going to feed the addiction. Or you experience stress at work and it knows that your ex or your partner is the one that gives you the dopamine, and so it tries to lead you there.
It's I know, I think I'd worked through so many of those cycles to my own marriage, and my health was in a shocking state when I left. I can honestly say 8.5 years later, I still don't think that I'm quite back. Well, I know I'm not.
Oh, if you ever have a lactose intolerance.
Yeah, I've got health issues ongoing that are quite, won't say severe, but they take some managing as a result of that 11-year relationship. And I'm 8 years out. Well, I won't say 8 years out. I'm 8 years separated. I've been, as you know, I've been an 8-year divorce battle ever since. Yeah. So it's still a feature of my life.
It's still very present.
It's still very present, yeah. So, but those cycles, I know you go through that. That's so telling. You go through cycles, like I say, of reconciliation, then it builds up again. And I used to say to the kids, I could feel him building. It was like a boil I was throwing that needed lancing. And there were times where we could be okay. Then there are times I'd have to say, you need to get in your bedrooms tonight. You need to be out the way because he's going to go. And you can predict it. But like I say, we don't talk about this with people.
No. And it's an important thing you bring up there, is there are times when he was okay. And that is very difficult, especially when you're talking to people outside of these relationships. And when, friends and family, as supportive and understanding as to be and can be for us in terms of our support network, trying to explain why there are times when they're okay. There are times when, it feels good, and that this is why you stay, and this is why you can't, they're not bad all the time. And for somebody, when you're talking to somebody about it, it's like, well, if there's one event, why don't you just leave? And that question is so loaded, and it's often asked very naively. But, understanding the trauma bond, that's why you can't leave, because you are chemically addicted to them, you are emotionally dependent on them, and you've got this energetic connection, which, is very difficult to verbalize anyway with anybody.
Yeah. And you could also be, it's not even that simple. There are physical logistics, aren't there? You've got children. Do you want to take your children away from their father? You've got financial control within these relationships. So Absolutely. Women have no resources to go and leave. You're in this house together, and you can be that broken and battered at the time, so to speak, emotionally, and even physically, that the thought of even going into a refuge is worse than actually staying where you are, because at least you've got familiarity. Absolutely. At least you've got your things.
And that's important.
That's
a very important point, because our subconscious loves to be able to recognize and predict and know what's going to happen next, and it doesn't actually mind whether that's destructive or constructive. As long as it knows, as long as it's familiar, as long as we're in a comfort zone, then it's happy to keep repeating those same behaviors and to be involved in that cycle. And that's why often it can be quite overwhelming, the prospect of coming out, having absolutely zero energy, like you say, being physically affected, and then having to muster up the strength, often with children in tow, to then start a new life. And that is a huge thing to consider and to undertake.
Yeah, and I think that's what keeps so many women trapped, is it's just too much for them to deal with. And there isn't a lot of support when you leave. People say, oh, let's go leave. There is support. From, I don't know, you may disagree, but from personal experience, when I left and then went to health professionals and social services, there was practically none.
There's practical support in as much as accommodation can be arranged, whereby there can be support in terms of benefits, income, especially in this country, you know, there are things in place. However, when it comes to the emotional support, when it comes to understanding of health professionals, how these relationships operate, how to recover from these relationships so that you don't find yourself in another cycle with another of these personality types, then no, there's very, very little.
I remember ringing up the doctor saying to me once, here's a number for some counselling, you might want to ring them up. And the question was, well, are you suicidal? And I was like, well, no, I'm not suicidal. So she said, well, why aren't you suicidal? Well, I've got kids. She said, but still, what's stopping you? And it's a strange thing to say, but I said, well, I can't kill myself because I couldn't live with myself if I did that. But I knew what I meant. But I was basically like, unless you're going to kill yourself, there was like no support. And I was thinking, actually, you know, I've been through huge amounts of trauma. All the women who go through huge amounts of trauma.
Huge trauma.
The mental torture techniques that they use are known as mental torture techniques that are used in severe interrogation environments, you know, through the armed forces and things like that. And yet they're designed to break people. And we come out literally broken. And there's nothing really there in that way to pick up the pieces.
Very little.
It's incredibly difficult. And women historically haven't talked about that. We've talked about difficult marriages, and he's a difficult man is often how it's talked about. And women in general, aren't they, I believe, are incredibly socialized into giving to their own detriment in relationships.
Absolutely.
That we, you know, you see it on Love Island and things which I can't even bear to watch. But the amount of narcissism and misogyny in so many of those young men is incredible. The girls are supposed to give more, prove more, and women, I think, are pushed into that all the time. There's this idea of, to be the good woman, you have to be self-sacrificial.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think that this is a big conversation that society needs to have on this level of
and you know, it's quite frightening in that we would think that as time goes on, as we become more aware of or you know, more supportive of equality between the genders, that this sort of thing should be getting less frequent, less common. But statistically, those that are 18 to 25 are experiencing more domestic abuse than they have than historically. Now, there's obviously questions to ask about the data gathering, about people talking about the conversation more open, but we are still finding that these young men, and I'm going to talk about male perpetrators because we're in a female group, and that is that I work with women. And the different dynamic with narcissism and women and male relationships, there is a different dynamic.
There is
but for young men in their still formative years, you know, under 25, they're still very much formative in terms of their personality development. They are encouraged almost by society to adopt these very narcissistic traits. Now, whether that means that they have full-blown narcissistic personality disorder is up for a kind of psychiatric and a psychological assessment, but these traits definitely exist in this group of society.
They definitely do. I think, you know, looking around at what's happening in I know we've had this conversation before about women's rights. I would think from when I was young, I would say misogyny is definitely on the increase. I think there's a lot to do with social media, the availability of porn, lots of things that have, if you like, radicalized young men against women. But fundamentally, it's in essence, I suppose, that we have quite I'll use the word inverted commas again, I keep doing that, but it's a lot of sick society in that women aren't really being what women are capable of being, but men, because of capitalism and patriarchy, you know, are existing in the corrupted masculine.
They are, and they're utilising the feminine as a resource.
Yeah,
you know, we've become a resource now, not only in the home, but also in industry, in service, in business, because we are, you know, everything is priced based on two people having an income. Now, you can't buy a house unless you've got two people having an income. You know, that's how capitalism has priced things now.
In essence, capitalism, one of the building blocks of capitalism, when you get right down to it, was unpaid domestic labour produced by women in the home. That is the building block of capitalism, and its knock-on effect through all these different mechanisms that expresses itself through systems and structures in society, socio-political and economic. And that, you know, when feminists originally said the personal is political, they're absolutely right, that women are now feel the effects of all that in a huge way in their interpersonal relationships.
I think that's absolutely,
it's still looked at as an individual issue.
And it's a domestic problem.
It's a society-wide issue.
So it is absolutely.
How do we spot? I mean, I'm very good at spotting them now, and I'm sure you are as well.
Call it a narc.
How do we spot the narcissist? Because I mean, I used to think when I started spotting them, I used to think, no, it must be me. Again, I started gaslighting myself. I kept thinking, it must be me. They can't be this prevalent.
They can't be everywhere.
So you look at the statistics and you look at male behaviour and what's happening in society. Actually, they are that common. So
and you know what? It's rewarded to be like that. Let's face it, you know, it is for a man, especially if they adopt, and actually for women, you know, in terms of, in order to achieve success by what we certainly would deem what a capitalistic success is in terms of having a high income, having material possessions. Those behaviors, these narcissistic traits are encouraged in order to get to the top. And at times, I sometimes feel like unless you've got them, you can't get there, because any sort of empathy for any other person, and suddenly you've got a question mark over what you should, whether what you're about to do is the right thing or not, because inevitably somebody always loses out. And if you're highly empathetic and you're attuned to all the different, and you've got good self-awareness and you're able to adopt multiple perspectives, often you can find yourself stuck with what to do next, because you can in some way, and that can often stop the behavior. Whereas if you're narcissistic, there's no empathy, so there's no putting yourself in anyone else's shoes, so it doesn't matter who loses out as long as you win.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think through the narcissism is capitalism and patriarchy is a narcissist playground, isn't it? Basically, and I think that's why you and I like working with women as well. A, because we don't have that problem, but also by encouraging more women to become wealthy, we have the political and economic might then to start to infiltrate the socio and economic systems which create our daily lived experience. I mean, that's one of my huge passions, is to get involved in politics at some point in time, when I'm to at least to be able to have enough wealth to lobby effectively to bring in real systematic changes. So how do we spot the narcissist? Because when you read about, you know, narcissistic relationships and domestic abuse, like I said, when you start opening up to people about, my husband does this, and, you know, let's be frank, like we said, it's 99% or 97% or whatever it is of domestic violence victims are women. Yeah. It is a crime perpetrated against women. When you start telling people, they'll look at you, and often because narcissists want to portray such a good public image outside, don't they? They will do anything for anybody else. They're the life and soul of the party, often, that when you open up and start telling people about them, they'll say, no, surely not so-and-so, and they don't believe you. But, you know, they don't go around with narcissists tattooed across their forehead. So how do we spot them? What are the red flags? I mean, I know what they are now, but for the benefit of everybody watching, what are the red flags that we need to look out for, that we should, if in our own self-interest, go, what are the big ones that we can spot?
So I think there are, a numerate number of red flags. The important thing probably to just say is that there are a couple of different types of narcissist. So you've got your overt narcissist, which is often the one that the media would portray, the vain, the shallow, the one that is heavily interested in materialistic possessions, is very much about the kind of the actor, the sports guy, you know, the big names that are overtly narcissistic. They overtly put themselves above other people. Yeah. Then you've got this thing called this covert narcissist, and I think these are the ones that are the ones that they walk among us, and they have this mindset that the grandiosity still exists for the covert. However, they're not so obvious about it. So whilst they still believe that they are more important than other people, that their opinions are more valuable, that people should agree with them at all times, that they are entitled to control people, that they're
the world expert on every subject that you put in
everything. But the reason why they haven't succeeded, the reason why they aren't the top of the tree, is because something external is stopping them. Now, that might be their boss, that might be you, that might be the traffic lights on the way home from work, anything to accept responsibility for their own path in life. And that is the covert narcissist, this woe is me, everything is always somebody else's fault. And they are the drain. They drain so much, because actually with the overt narcissist, often the sense of shame that might be brought upon them and their reputation, if they were to be an abusive person, if they were to be malignant in the way that they treat other people, that would cause them even more of a narcissistic injury. So they almost self-stop themselves from being malignant to being liars. They often cheat. They are often, these playboy kind of types, but they are very, very good at spinning and surrounding themselves with these people that adore and admire them. Covert narcissists, not so much. They're not so fearful of shame. And so they will just outrightly, flatly deny the truth and continue to portray that outside impression, gaslight everybody form, and continue to live according to this inner sense of reputation, the ego, essentially.
Yeah, I think once you see the extremes of gaslighting, I know in my marriage were quite shocking. We'd both be at something and at an event or be somewhere, and the experience was as it was. And then when he would be telling somebody else about the experience, it was like, well, were you in a movie? Because or they'd say you'd had a conversation with someone, like he said, Fay said so. I never said that. And yet in his mind, it was real. He was adamant.
And that's so important to remember.
That it had happened. And I was like, no. So, I think that is the hard part, that you then start to, you start to doubt everything they've ever said then, don't you? Think, well, how do I know anything?
Because their level of truth, and this kind of personality, these kinds of people are the reasons why lie detectors are not admissible in court, because they believe their lies so vehemently that they are not lying. It doesn't affect their heart rate, doesn't get affected, their sweat production isn't affected, because despite the fact that it might be categorically untrue, they believe it that well that they can pass a lie detector test on it. And that is mind-blowing.
It is.
In terms of
so I couldn't believe the extent of gaslighting, actually, when it actually came to the end of the relationship. Things then that were going on when I realized I got to leave, and I was listening to things that he was saying and telling other people, I was like, he lives in a complete fantasy world in his head. He doesn't exist in the world that the rest of us are trying to live in. And it was quite a real eye-opening moment. The person that she actually lied but didn't know he was lying.
No idea. And that person that you are, and you know yourself to be, and that we have projected into the relationship, and that we believe they believe we are, that doesn't exist either. And so that's a very, very sad thing, to come to the realization that actually nothing in the relationship was real from either side. The person they portrayed to you was never real, and the person that they believe that you are, fortunately, probably isn't real, because they don't have a very positive impression of you, and hence why they believe they're entitled to exact power and control over pretty much everything that you do.
Yeah, it was a relief, actually, when I left, to really see him as he was, and to realize that I hadn't lost anything, because the person that I thought wasn't there wasn't existed. But it was also a huge relief to shed that very limited persona that was increasingly put on me, that other people started to treat me as if I was this downtrodden, dumb, stupid woman. And I was like, actually, I'm multiple degree educated. I was a professional. I'm not stupid. I'm incredibly capable. And
And in both of our
that was a relief to shed that.
Absolutely. And in both our experiences, we were both in business with our narcissistic partners. And that is, you know, that's a really kind of interesting thing when we talk about business, is because often we were the ones that were the driving force, we were the capable ones, but we were almost, we were carrying it, but they were taking all of the credit. Even to the point where I believed that I was supporting him, despite the fact that, you know, I'd created the business, I did pretty much every aspect of it, yet I was supporting him in running his business.
Yeah, that's how I was treated. I was the little woman who did the bookkeeping, and that's like, I kept the show on the road. You know, I kept the family, I supported the family, I paid for everything. In fact, if I hadn't have supported the family and in the end realised financially I was actually propping up the farm business, that it wouldn't have survived without me being there, you know.
And actually, I don't know about you, but on reflecting, the business hasn't survived. You know, as I left the business, it hasn't survived, you know. And I think that in your situation, you know, the same to be true for your ex-partner.
For my ex, that's why partly why the divorce has been so ongoing, because he's still trying to use me as a cash cow. So because he's you know, it won't run. So, but I think. I was going to ask a really pertinent question then, and it's gone out of my head now. We've talked about narcissism. We've talked about the cycles within that you go through. Well,
we're going to talk about some red flags more. So shall we do
more red
there
flags?
Are some really interesting red flags, you know, and also some interesting shared characteristics amongst women that are in these kinds of relationships. And I think that's really important, because our shared characteristics, the things that make us often kind of vulnerable to these types of relationships, although I don't really like to use that kind of wording, are important, because those are the characteristics we also need to kind of cultivate to heal, to recover, and to move forward. But in terms of red flags, if you're in a relationship, I think it's important to talk about some of them. Like I say, there are innumerate numbers, but ones that really stick out to me are, and these are going to sound like quite strange things, and quite specific, but sibling relationships. The relationship that your partner has with their siblings is really, really indicative of the kind of upbringing, the family dynamic in which their personality developed, and also how they can hold space for other people, because a sibling relationship is a really, really unique bond. We don't form a lot of that. We can't repeat that bond outside of the family dynamic. And often we find with narcissists, in my experience, and of all the people that I work with, they've all got a very similar story around this. And it's often that they've fallen out with a sibling over something that seems to be really quite unimportant, trivial, but they cannot reconcile it. No one's budging on it. And often money. I mean, 9 times out of 10, it's something to do with some small amount of money often as well, you know, in the hundreds, not the thousands even, but there's just no reconciliation of this. And that's a really big red flag to me in terms of what kind of relationship somebody's got with their sibling. So that's an important one. And that's one that often can click with people. Yeah, this all sounds like my partner.
Yeah, I mean, my husband was an only child, but he fell out with all his neighbours over the stupidest little things, and I didn't realise how much of a red flag that was at the time. So it was like,
actually, and that's exactly right. You know, that falling out with people over things that are, and restaurants, going out to restaurants as well. You know. And that is the reaction of anybody that's had a narcissistic partner, is going out to a restaurant. And you know, I think I could talk for hours about the kind of psychology behind
the memories. Tap.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll do this afterwards.
And you know, they are really, really difficult to go out for, and it's the perfect platform for them to make their opinion known and to exact some kind of power and dominion over the situation, because they're the customer, and being fed. And it, like I say, I could talk for hours about how it feeds into this idea of like, you know, food being, you know, a status symbol, and, you know, the better the food is, the more important a person you are. Kings eating in a certain way to peasants, you know. I think that there's so much in there. But restaurant experiences, you know, people that cannot empathize with a restaurant. Now, if food's bad, if the experience is bad, then of course maybe you need to make a complaint. But if somebody's creating problems around a meal so that they can either get a discount or just exact some sort of control, often picking on somebody who's really, you know, in a low paid job that isn't really the right person.
It's often a young female waitress as well, isn't it, who gets the brunt of it.
Yeah. Exactly. And, you know, yeah, restaurant experiences, like I say, are a real indicator of
awful. It's put me off going out to eat.
I know. You know what's interesting, though, you're right. It does put you off going out to eat. And actually, in the last 18 months, 2 years, we haven't been able to go out to eat as much for other reasons. But just the whole experience is tainted for me. And I love going out to eat. I was in hospitality for many years.
There will be certain places I can honestly say I don't think I'll ever be able to go and eat at again. There are some that have memories of eating in very nicely before the relationship that I can conjure those.
Yeah, absolutely. Put yourself back.
And I can't even bear to walk past them on the street because you can't. It's not that the memories are painful. You know, they're innate now. They don't bother me, but they're still there, and your mind can't help but pull them back up. So I'm not like, I never avoid trauma or anything like that. You know, you have to deal with it. But then that's just a trigger that's going to bring up unpleasant memories. So why bother putting yourself back in it? You know, you can park.
Yeah, absolutely. You can still make choices about what you subject yourself to.
Don't have to go back and relive that experience.
So maybe it's one of those life lessons to explore new restaurants. You know, it's like, there's no need to go and have yourself up. Excuse the pun.
And kinds of food you won't eat. So it's like, right, it's Malaysian. I can go to Malaysian restaurants now because he didn't like Malaysian.
Yeah, because he wouldn't eat that muck. That's what they say.
Yeah, so it's foreign muck. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the other thing I wanted to talk about actually was, like you say, it was also about how we get into these narcissistic relationships, because there's patterns, isn't there? Like you say, of being love bombed to start with. You know, it's all flowers, it's cards, it's roses, it's wonderful, and you think you've got this great relationship, and then they start to adopt these tactics of isolation, don't they? So they start to isolate, and that you can even get moved to another place, to another city geographically, while they attempt to isolate. Yeah. So there's a definite pattern, isn't there? And like I said, I think we need to, if it's okay to you to talk about this, because we spoke just before we come on the air about this stereotype of women who end up in abusive and narcissistic relationships as somehow being troubled and traumatized and problematic or unaware. And actually, that's not the case. Often very successful women like you and I got sucked into these relationships, and it happens because of this pattern of behavior that you end up getting indoctrinated into slowly.
And that's the thing with this trauma bond, with the way that these relationships are, the cycles, it's consistent small behaviors. The thing that I always kind of liken it to is, you know, if you go to a low cost shop, you know, like here we have like Poundland or B&M, you know, somewhere where everything is quite cheap. It's all kind of £1, maybe £1.50. It's all low cost items. And you walk around with your basket and you're like, oh, that's a good price. Brilliant. Oh, that's only 40p. That's going in the basket. And you keep going around and you go all the different departments even. So you've got some cheap stuff for the bathroom and some cheap stuff for the bedroom and there's some cheap toys. And by the time you get to the till, the bill is over £100, and you've only got this trolley full of low-cost things. And actually, what you've got is a trolley full of crap. And that is being in a narcissistic relationship. Is that all these small transactions mount up, and you can't quite believe at the end of it how much it's cost you for absolutely nothing.
Yeah, it's the little comments, isn't it, that chip away at your confidence. Oh, you're wearing that? Well, you know, and then they'll say things in a tone of voice. You'll go, why did you say it like that? And they go, well, I didn't. I just said, you know, why are you wearing that? And they'll change the tone of voice, and this is gaslighting.
It was a joke.
It's this pattern of, it's like you say, it's love bombing, isolation, and then it's like getting more severe with the divorce and
undermining your ability to do things. You know, oh, I'm surprised you've managed to do that. Oh, I don't think, oh, I'll do that because I don't think that you can. And then you have to kind of stick up for yourself, but then that can invoke what's called a narcissistic rage, or it can later come out in a behavior that is really intimidating and fear mongering. And so you then start to, and you will reflect, because we all self-reflect. So, you know, once we've experienced maybe a narcissistic rage or an outburst, we then do the normal thing of trying to reflect back about what caused it. And that's when we start to ask questions. Oh, well, I did say that I could do something and he said I couldn't, or he did mention how much I spent in the supermarket. Maybe I need to spend less. Maybe that will stop it from happening. You know, and we start to then question our behaviours, because we're in control of our behaviour. And so if we can adjust our behaviour, maybe that will change theirs. And the fact is that can't ever work.
You end up running out of things to alter.
Absolutely. And in the end, you end up with no energy
left of you.
Exactly.
And there is nothing left. You think, I cannot do any more apart from probably slit my own throat and lie on the kitchen floor bleeding. And even then you won't be happy. You know?
And then you'll moan about the mess, you know, and that is the truth. You know, there isn't anything that you can do to fix them or fix the relationship. And once you identify that, if this is the kind of relationship dynamic that you find yourself in, you know, that is why we all would say, you know, get out safely, because it's important to remember that even if somebody has been highly emotionally and psychologically abusive but hasn't ever used physical threats of violence or, you know, actually been physically abusive, when they're under the cosh, when it's about to change, when the situation that they've set up for themselves isn't going to serve them in the way that they want it to or they expect it to, then they will stoop to lower and lower and lower behaviours. And it's not dramatic to think that you're physically in danger, even if somebody has never actually laid their hands on you before.
And I think we see that, we've seen that so many times, don't we? We see women killed all the time by their abusive or their current relationship, because they still want to exercise that control. I know violence started to creep into my relationship, and I know if I hadn't left the day I had left, I know that violence was going to be perpetrated that night to prevent me from doing something I was going to do. And there was no doubt in my mind, if I hadn't left the day I did, I wouldn't have been able to leave at all. Yeah. So it was then or never. But you can feel there was just this shift, and I was like, oh, this is a line we've not crossed before.
And you know, that's exactly right. That intuition, that you can feel it. That is so important, because our intuition gets so suppressed. And often, everyone I speak to, there's been a moment at the start of the relationship where they've been alarmed, alerted, a red flag has been waved, and we've quashed it down. We've used, you know, their childhood trauma, the stress at work, whatever it is that we've excused their behaviour for. We've explained their behaviour away. However, it's important to note there are no excuses for abusive behaviour.
I think, like I say, again, we've spoken. I think, we're right. I think I ignored red flags, so we've already spoken about this. This is the problem with the socialization of women to be givers and be so empathetic and make excuses for men, when we need to stop making excuses for violent and abusive male behaviour.
It's just not acceptable.
Up until now, generations of women have had to make those excuses because we're often, you know, we may be in homes where, you know, we've got that level of financial dependence. If we've got married, because the whole, like I say, society is geared up for this role of women, and this is why women acquiring more wealth and power is only a good thing on both an individual level and a societal level.
And because of the way that women operate in business, because we are not so masculine in our energy around it, we are more interested in collaborating. We're more interested in disrupting these kinds of very linear business-like behaviours to spread kind of wealth amongst a community rather than trying to extract wealth from that community. It's about cultivating more success, more wealth, so that there's more impact and more diversity in business. And that is very, very dangerous for the patriarchy, because that
we know that wealthy women spend money differently. We know that wealthy women put their money back into the immediate economy. We know that women in business will often support each other and help each other and leg each other up and you know, promote, like we're doing today. We're supporting each other.
Exactly.
You're in your field, mine in my field. But you know, like you said, you've already done. We do. You know, you and I, we do podcasts for the people. They're coming out. Get in the right group, and women support each other. And it is a very different experience that women have than, particularly, for instance, if you're in a narcissistic relationship, what your male partner thinks that relationship that women have. And that's another, I think, quite an important distinction, that they don't believe that women don't have any kind of camaraderie. They think women are in total competition all the time. And we are absolutely not.
We are not, but actually we are not. We have no desire to be.
No.
But interestingly, we are socialized to be pitted against each other. And I think we will have all gone through a time in life where we have experienced that sense of being pitted against other women in an attempt to try and attract a mate. And if we look at kind of teenage girls, for example, you know, the falling out, the arguing, you know, all of that is very much based on pitting against one another in some sort of competition-like situation.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, when you get groups of girls together in a safe space and we talk openly, the conversation's very, very different.
It is very different. It's this, the feminine role, isn't it? And it's like, it's so weird. It's when you look, you know, in our society, you know, it's almost like women have to do all the attractive. I mean, we do. I mean, there's these very basic masculine and feminine roles.
Yeah.
But actually, there's so much, and this is about actually a lot of research I did into male-female attraction relationship research I did a few years ago. It's so much about, it's fascinating actually, what is love to men and what is love to women is very different, our expectations and how we behave. But there's so much about girls chasing men often that time. We have to show what they're going to get, you know, more flesh, more this, more that and the other. But actually the male dynamic is to chase, and it's the woman to let him chase. But that kind of dynamic has lost, and taking the time to see if he will chase, because a narcissist won't. A narcissist will just give up and wander off at the first obstacle, whereas you know, a more quality man will want to show his worth to you.
Absolutely.
And be willing to demonstrate his worth, whereas a narcissist will want you to give and prove yourself all the time.
This is that thing of that supply. I don't know, we haven't gone into huge detail about narcissistic supply, but the reason why they are so adept at manipulating, at trying to create a life that serves their internal reality, which is a very false one, is because they feed off supply. They feed off emotional responses and status and that material kind of thing. So when you stop giving them supply, that's when you start to see the mask slip. And that is why boundaries are the way to test. So any red flag that you see, if it's pink or if you're not sure, stick a boundary in there. It doesn't have to be a serious one. It could just be, text me after midnight. Don't do this at this time, especially a time frame one, you know. Any sort of boundary you lay down, a narcissist will push it straight away. And that is without a doubt.
Yeah, like just carrying on doing things you did before you met them, or don't text me on Friday, I'm going out with the girls. Guarantee you'll be in the pub and you'll get a message. Are you enjoying yourself? Why do you need to know? Is it because you don't trust me, you know? Or it'll be, I've got to go, you know.
And exactly that. It won't be anything obvious.
No.
It won't be anything obvious. It won't be anything like, I do not want you to be out with your girls. The initial one will be,
it won't be anything obvious. It'll be high,
and
having a good time.
Broken that boundary, next week it'll be, oh, there's been an emergency, can you come home? And you make your excuses and you go home and you meet them, and then the next week it's, oh, I don't want that to happen again like it did last week. Can you just stay this week? And if you keep on, they will keep on pushing that boundary. And if you do not establish it and maintain it, then you find yourself feeding the supply. You become drained from it.
Like you say, in this prevention isn't them shouting at you and laying down the law going, you can't go. It's little incremental things that if you try to describe it to someone, they'll look at it and go, but that was innocuous. He could have just meant it innocently.
He could have, exactly.
Doing something that could have been seen as very innocent, but it's just they're just chip all the time.
And it's intention, you know, their intention is to do that. Their intention is to extract the power control in some way. And they are patient about it. They are responding, reacting to the different things that are happening and intending to change the situation so it serves them. And it's the intention is always to serve them. And that's the difference. So these behaviours could well being displayed by different people. The same thing even can be displayed by the two different people, exactly the same behaviour, but it's the intention behind it, which is what marks the kind of the narcissism.
Yeah, I think, and you feel it in your gut, don't you? Someone can ask you the same question, you feel fine about it. They ask you the question and you go, ugh. And that is what, like I said, women are brought up not to listen to, is this gut instinct. It's this intuition, that our inner voice going, this is not safe, because that's what it's trying to tell you. And we just push that down.
And if we don't listen, then we do flip into survival mode, and it becomes very, very difficult to make rational, sensible decisions in survival mode, especially when we're experiencing somebody who is a physically stronger person, despite the fact that they might not be actually being physically threatening. At a base level, we're aware that we can't fight this person. And that's what our amygdala is interested in. That's what our amygdala is trying to work out is, are we physically safe? Are we emotionally safe? And
I think they play on that dynamic, don't they? That fundamentally, women's safety is often not in their own hands. Women's safety is women relying on men to behave themselves and not be violent. That is fundamentally, and they know that, and they play on that all the time. So I know my own husband used to be incredibly intimidating. He's only violent towards the end, but a lot of it was the intimidation of, I could really hurt you. I'm just not going to at the moment. And there was that constant undercurrent when people weren't out there. So
I'm talking about other experiences that they've had of physical violence. So my ex, he had been a brawler a lot. So he would often talk about brawls in pubs or outside of pubs, and he'd apparently, when I first met him, he'd reformed from all of that. He'd learned from that. But the kinds of language around when somebody's been wronged, I could really hurt that person. Oh, I would just like to get that person in a headlock. That kind of language is very alarming to a woman, especially one that has not been brought up or experienced physical violence. And, that is important because there are lots of people that find themselves in abusive relationships because they've experienced an abusive dynamic in their childhood. There are also lots that have experienced a very healthy model of a relationship in their childhood, and therefore they project that healthy model onto everybody. And that can be as much of an issue. And often people want to reflect back, and especially when traditional therapies are used to treat abuse recovery, often people are trying to find the cause in someone's childhood. And the reality is that somebody came into your life and chose to abuse you, and that is just shit. There isn't any kind of reflecting back into your childhood to try and work out what went wrong. They made their choices and they hurt you, and that's not okay. And often that's where it needs to stop.
And again, looking back into childhood in a way is victim blaming. It's really your experience. You allowed this to happen. I had some traumatic experiences as childhood, but as far as I was concerned, I'd done the healing, I'd moved on, I'd had other relationships, and it came almost as a shock to me when I realised that there may have been some subconscious beliefs under there, don't get me wrong, but fundamentally I'd made a conscious effort to move away from all those patterns and those things. I'd really worked hard at it. And he came in through another route, you know, and then to find myself in that, going, shit, I didn't spot that.
And you know, that's an interesting thing, because they are so good at getting on you when you're vulnerable. And pretty much everybody I speak to, you know, they are at a time in their life where they meet these people where there is some sort of vulnerability that's being exploited, where they have come in and they are going to be the person that changes your outlook, your destiny, your, you know, all of this kind of language around, you know, that this relationship's going to heal me, it's going to prove to me that not all men are trash, you know. And they feed that. They feed that animal because it's what we need to hear at the time.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's lots we haven't talked about today, but I'm very aware we've not talked about how they use your children against you. No. There's a whole, I mean,
or maybe co-parenting at all, or parallel parenting.
Maybe we can come back and talk about that in another occasion, because definitely. I think, you know, these conversations do need to be had, because this is not uncommon for women to be living in these relationships. It is incredibly common. And if we can add our voices to these debates so more women are aware, and if you recognise this in particularly, you know, it may not be you, but you might start to have inklings about your friends' relationships, or your sister's relationships, or your mother's, you know, new partner or whatever, and you're just thinking something isn't right here, but I can't quite put my finger on it. And I think narcissistic abuse leaves many people feeling like that they can't necessarily exactly put their finger on what is wrong.
It's the dissonance, the behaviour and the belief.
Yeah, you sometimes you have to unpick conversations, don't you? To really, it can sound like an ordinary conversation. So you come out of it thinking, oh, that's left me feeling really uncomfortable, but I don't know why. And, you know, there's so much we can unpick.
And being physically drained, especially if you're highly empathic, which often women that find themselves in these situations are highly empathic. That real sense of being drained is a real thing.
I used to be so exhausted. I used to fall asleep at 8 o'clock every night. Kids went to bed. So did I. And I'd have a job to get them there for school in the morning. I was just physically exhausted all the time. And you, like you say, it's the adrenaline, it's the cortisol. You're just firefighting. Are they going to come in the house? What mood are they going to come in? Do I need to pick anything up, tidy anything up? You had to preempt them all the time. And that is so exhausting. So draining.
And you know, it's interesting you say about sleep, is because in order to actually get restful and productive sleep, our parasympathetic nervous state needs to be activated. But if we're living in survival mode all day long, we're sleeping in a sympathetic state, and we are not going to get to recover and heal and restore. And that's where we get these chronic illnesses from as well.
Yeah, your body just can't recover. I know when I left, my body was literally collapsing underneath me. And thank God.
I remember just saying, I haven't got the energy for this. I haven't got the energy for anything. You know, where am I going to get this from? You know?
Yeah. It's just shocking. I mean, fortunately, when I fled, my mum had, you know, literally took me on holiday the next day, and that's only the reason I escaped. Really, it was because I had the camper van to go and stay in that she'd hired to go in a fortnight. We went to Ireland, back to Ireland where I used to live, and I was all right. It was really weird. I was all right for the first few days. I was just like, thank God. We've got out. Thank God we got out. And then I went somewhere, and I'd got 2 kids. You know, my boy, they're brilliant kids, but they had this little spat like siblings do. And then that's when the floodgates opened for me. I had an absolute literal meltdown, nearly had a nervous breakdown. Every cell of my body hurt. I was just lying on the floor, sobbing. I think my family just looked at me. I don't think they quite realised what was going on, but it was like, that was my breakdown moment. I had to have it out. And thank God I was with family. Because I never felt anything like that. It was just...
And, you know, the thing is, Faye, it's about being safe to actually express that trauma, actually to release it. And until you've been out, you know, you, like you say, those first few days, without a doubt, I can completely resonate with that. You feel on top of, you're out, I'm out. And then your subconscious catches up with the reality, and it can sense that you are actually out and you're safe. And then it's like, right, well, let's deal with all this stuff.
And literally. So but I mean, but it's quite, you don't, I just say, I don't think you, because you're firefighting when you're in there, you're in survival mode, you really, it's just you're living moment. I mean, it gets to the point where you're not living day by day, are you? Living hour by hour, and then half an hour by half an hour. That it gets shorter and shorter and shorter. Then to break that cycle, then, you know, the relief has to come. And, you know, so, yeah, if Yeah, and I just thank God, women have, if you need a support network around you, if you can, just anybody, one person.
Absolutely, and being around people, absolutely, and people that have been through something similar. I have a Facebook group and a Zoom group where we connect survivors, and we just spend time chatting about narcissism and about other things, but just with people that get it, that understand that if you do run into your ex, or they drive past you, or you go past that restaurant that has triggered you, that you're not just talking nonsense, that they get why that has affected your day. It's really, really important.
Yeah, I think it's so important to have support groups, and it's so good that people like yourself are coming up now online and being able to offer that level of support that I don't think has been there the way women have needed it.
No, and it's support because it's online, because we're busy mums invariably. It's accessible when we need it. It's there when we need it, rather than having to go to a group meeting on a Tuesday night and sorting out kids, getting the kids looked after. What? That's not even feasible for me. That wouldn't be feasible for me to go out every Tuesday to go and do a domestic abuse course. That would never have been feasible for me, let alone with COVID and all of that. So to have online spaces where also they are run by people that get it, where you connecting people that are similar, that the stereotype, which I don't even believe exists, because I've never met anybody that fits the stereotype of the battered wife. I've just never met that person. That's a very male stereotype.
I've never met that weak, disturbed woman who was who stepped into the narcissist like she. I've never met her either. Never met her.
And the narcissist isn't drawn to that person. I don't think she exists anyway, but even if she did, that wouldn't serve the narcissist in any way.
They're much more drawn
strong
women up there. They're quite successful. They're like a shining light. They've got confidence. They radiate. They've got a lot of people around them. That's what he's drawn to, that brilliance. And that is also the thing that he absolutely hates, because it shines up his own inadequacies. So he has to take the luster off the pearl to bring it down. And that's what his sole objective then is, because your brilliance highlights his inadequacies. And
absolutely. And healthy relationships involve supporting one another. They involve supporting each other's growth. They involve balance. They involve compassion and understanding, and attempts to resolve any differences, not to highlight them and to utilize them to make you feel undermined. And thinking about what a healthy, balanced relationship looks like often shines the light on being in a toxic and unhealthy one.
Yeah, they weaponize everything against you, don't they? And it's a skill. As I say, let's continue this conversation. Actually,
I think there's so much, lots more to talk about.
So much more to talk about. I think it's great because we've both been through it. That that adds an extra dynamic. And like I say, we know that when other women, like I say, I think when you've been through it, like I say, it gives you a level of understanding, and that, like you say, we'll talk about what triggers us.
You can't unlearn this stuff,
triggers. So, Eve will be we'll put details up about Eve's group and the support that she offers under this live.
And if anyone's got any questions about whether they think that their relationship fits in with this, or if they've got any questions about, do just ask, because
how you can support a friend, anything. So we're live at the moment, but if you're watching this on replay, it'll be up on other platforms. So do put your comments in, and we will make sure that they are answered. We won't, it'll be a thing. And if you want notification when we go live to progress this conversation further, we will make sure that you're tagged in and you know where to join us. So yes, I think I need a cup of tea after all that.
Absolutely, definitely.
Right, well, thank you very much, everybody who's watched and everybody who's joined. And thank you, Eve. And we will continue this on another occasion so that we can bring more awareness to what narcissism and domestic abuse, how it affects women, and how they can help themselves and recognise and help each other. Okay, it's been lovely to talk to you. Have a great weekend.
Yes, and you.
And I will speak to you all and see you all again very soon. Take care then. Bye.
Bye-bye.